Welcome back. My name is David Blissett, and in this video we're actually going to start trying to handle multiple transition states. So where we left off in the last video, we went ahead and mirrored the transitions or the actual animations so that we had both a left and right as opposed to just a left, left being a mirror of the right transition. And now we brought them into the animation or animator palette, and we're actually going to start wiring them up to be able to support multiple states. So at the moment we have the idle state. We can go from idle into a feeding state, but we also have these turning states that we want to be able to add logic to or add conditions to so that we can switch between the various states. So the very first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead, make a transition from idle to turning left, make another transition from idle, from idle going over to right. Then we're going to want to go back from turning left back to idle, and from turning right to idle. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure that all these are set to false for has exit time, because we want these actions to be responsive. The second you select them, they should automatically activate. So let's go ahead and make sure that those flags are switched off. Okay, so for the first one, we want to be turning left. For that, we're going to need some kind of a condition or flag that will allow us to be able to set the current state for turning. So for that, let's go in here, and we're going to have an integer this time, and we're going to call it turning state. The default for the time being will be set to 0, but we're going to need to add some conditions to actually drive that, right? So we've got the transition from idle to turning left. Go ahead, we're going to add a flag, and we're going to say if the turning left state is less than 0. All right, for the turning right, we want to add another condition for turning state, and we're going to say greater than 0. And then for the existing transition coming in from the idle going into the feeding state or biting, a matter of fact, I keep calling that 0. Let's divert just a quick second, and I want to change this to feeding here. So the actual zombie biting is the motion field, but we can actually override it. So let's call this feeding, right? And it's there, right? So let's head back quickly. So we're going from a transition from idle to feeding, and here we want to make sure that the transition for the turning state is 0. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so if the turning state is 0, it's okay to go, no, it's supposed to be equal to 0. If it's equal to 0, we head into the feeding state. If it is less than 0, we go turning left. And if it is greater than 0, we go turning right. So we can go ahead and add a condition to transition back to the idle. So if we say this is equal, turning state is equal to 0. And again, heading back to idle, turning state equal to 0. We've already set the transition coming in from idle, but we want another transition going from the feeding state back to idle. So we're going to have multiple transitions in this specific sequence. And here we have an indicator showing you have multiple states. So if I go ahead and click on the first one, that's what we've got. Is feeding equal to false? That's when we switch off. And this second state, it doesn't have any assignment. And in this one, we're going to go ahead and make the transition here. If we say is turning state is equal to 0. Okay, so how do we test that now? We have these parameters that we got configured. So let's start things up and play around with these transitions now. Okay, so by default, the characters here in idle, turning state is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and try changing that value to 1. So immediately the character starts turning in the right-hand direction. If I say -1, the character will then turn back. If I set that to 0, the character is back in idle, and then I can go ahead and place that character back into the feeding state. Now, what if I was to change its value to 1? Now the character state should have turned right, but it currently has feeding on. I switch that off, goes back to idle, and then switches over to right. So this is a scenario in which you have multiple states and how you would configure the character to be able to switch between those states. Obviously, the kind of logic that you go ahead and implement is going to be depending on what you're actually trying to do, but this is the base configuration for how you'd actually be able to handle it. We've also been able to demo how to put multiple transitions on to a character and how you then have those activated. Now, realistically, you're not going to be wanting to drive this from within the actual Unity interface itself. You're going to want to drive something like this via scripts, probably responding to keyboard events, some kind of controller or touch movement, so on and so forth. We're going to be detailing that a bit later, but just for now, this is the kind of basic steps you'll do when handling multiple transitions. So that's it for now. We're going to pick things up in the next video. I hope you've been keeping up to date with what we've done. It might be worth, if you've just done a search and hit this video, it might be worth heading back to the first set of sequence of videos where we detailed how to actually get the models downloaded from Mixamo, going through Fuse, getting them set up within an environment, and the various other videos that follow leading up to this date. And they're going to get a bit more advanced. So right now we've not done any coding, but we're going to be moving into coding pretty soon. So we're going to stop the video here and pick things up in the next video. Again, thanks for watching.